Adolescent drug use is a huge social issue that affects hundreds of thousands of teenagers and their families. Luckily, advances in research show that there are effective family-centered solutions. Tyler Liebert is one such person who experienced the devastating effects of substance use. He was a young person with a bright and promising future, but at just 11 years old, he started experimenting with drugs and alcohol because he wanted to fit in with his friends who drank and did drugs. His drug use quickly escalated over the next 12 years to the point where he couldn't find a reason to keep living. As he sat in a dark room one night about to take his life, his mother, who he was estranged from, called him. This was ultimately the point that saved his life. He realized that he could either continue on this path of destruction or turn his life around. Luckily for Tyler, his family supported him and he went to inpatient treatment. Today, he is a motivational speaker who talks about his substance use journey. Substance use affects so many young lives across the world. So you can understand the extent of this issue, here are some stats from the CDC. 15% of high school students reported ever having used select illicit or injection drugs. That includes cocaine, inhalants, heroin, meth, hallucinogens, and ecstasy. By 12th grade, about 2/3 of students have tried alcohol, and about half of 9th through 12th graders reported ever having used marijuana. The substances we'll be talking about today include opioids, illicit drugs, injection drugs, alcohol, marijuana, cigarettes, and nicotine. Most of the time I'll just say substance, but sometimes I'll specify a certain type of substance. And an adolescent is an individual between 10 to 21 years old. The age range varied from study to study. Now, family environment factors are important components of the problem of teen substance use. Family is an adolescent's first primary discourse, so it heavily influences if a teen uses substances and how they view substance use. According to Stephen Barr in the journal article Parental and Peer Influences on the Risk of Adolescent Drug Use, the social learning theory explains that a teen's important primary groups shape their attitude towards substance use. For most teenagers, the primary group is their family or the friends they socialize with the most. So according to the social learning theory, teens accept and internalize the attitude of their family or close social circle. So if your friends and family smoke weed, you're very likely to also smoke weed or at least think it's fine. According to Barr, how much our views reflect our social circles is determined by 4 things: frequency, intensity, duration, and priority of social interactions. Now, some people might make the argument that our friends influence substance use more than family. As we get older and gain independence from our parents, we start spending more time and socialize more with our friends. We may also start placing more importance and paying more attention to our friends. However, with most teens, their family is the first social circle they belong to. Teens also are likely to have frequent, non-superficial interactions with their families over a long stretch of time. After all, they usually live with their family. This means that teens are more likely to internalize the pro-drug or anti-drug attitudes and behaviors of their family. In addition, according to Dr. John Hoffman and Dr. Susan Su, in the article Parental Substance Use Disorder, Mediating Variables and Adolescent Drug Use, peer effects on adolescent drug use have been overstated due to several methodological limitations, including failure to account for parental influence. A teen's parents' opinions and beliefs affects who they choose to hang out with. If we respect our parents' desires, we're likely to choose parent-approved friends who hold similar beliefs to our own. According to Chaoyang Li et al., in the scholarly article, Parental Substance Use as a Modifier of Adolescent Substance Use Risk, several studies showed that substance use rates were highest among adolescents who had both parents and friends who used substances. Lee et al. Also found that teens with parents who used marijuana were more than twice as likely to drink, smoke, or use marijuana compared to the group with parents who weren't marijuana users. In the group with substance-using parents, having friends who use substances was a significant predictor of later substance use. Teens with parents who didn't use substances but still had friends who used were not likely to use substances later in life. This shows that the adolescents with non-using parents internalize their parents' opinions about substance use. Because of how much parents influence their teens' friends, peer influence is largely overstated. Knowing that peer choice and risk factors for teen drug use are mediated by parental influences is important because knowing the real roots of the problem is essential for implementing effective solutions and strategies. John Hoffman, in the journal article Cumulative Stress and Substance Use from Early Adolescence to Emerging Adulthood, talks about his study on stress in the family environment and its effect on teenager substance use. In the study, he found that high levels of cumulative or persistent stress meant a rapid escalation of substance use. Moderate levels of stress meant an increased use during early adolescence, but then a decrease during late adolescence and emerging adulthood. Low levels of stress equaled minimal or occasional use. Cumulative stress negatively affects areas of the brain that manage impulse control, disrupt the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis, and modify dopamine and cortisol metabolization, all of which increase the likelihood of substance use. Essentially, when we're stressed out, we're way more likely to do stupid things. Feel free to quote that the next time you need an excuse. Anywho, Hoffman explains why teens are especially susceptible to use substances under stress. Number 1. Adolescents aren't equipped with the greatest cognitive coping skills, and therefore turn to substances as a behavioral coping strategy. Number 2. As we get older, we tend to broaden our social circle and take on greater responsibilities. These added responsibilities can include getting a job or having tons of schoolwork, such as excessively elaborate video projects about a social issue. Well, anyway, these greater responsibilities and larger social circles can result in more stressful events, which in turn increases the likelihood of substance use. Number 3. Teens naturally have higher stress reactions than wizened old adults. This heightened reactivity leads to a greater risk of substance use. So basically, teenagers are more likely to freak out when something bad happens. A severe and major stressful event, such as a family breakup, may lead to a teen turning to substances. However, cumulative and persistent stressors that build up lead to more consequential effects than a short-term stressful experience. An example of a persistent stressor in the family context is continuous financial difficulty or constant arguments about who ate your leftovers. Seriously. Cumulative stressful experiences when you're young can also lead to consequent problems later in life, so it is important for cumulative or persistent stressors to be addressed as soon as possible. In a study examining 2009 to 2014 national surveys on drug use and health, Dr. Rachel N. Lipari and Strother L. Van Horn found that 1 in 8 children aged 17 or younger lived in a household with at least one parent who had a past year substance use disorder, which is abbreviated SUD. Hoffman found in his study Parental Substance Use Disorder, Mediating Variables and Adolescent Drug Use that the kids of parents who use substances have a heightened risk of substance use. This partly has to do with the social learning theory we discussed earlier. As a refresher, the social learning theory basically says that a teen's opinions on substance use is similar to their friends and family. So if a teen has been raised in a family that uses substances, they're likely to use themselves or at least think it's okay. Increased stress and poor family relations in families with substance use also contribute to a greater risk of using. Parental substance use disorder, aka PSUD families, tend to have less resources and weaker interpersonal and coping skills. This also makes divorce and job loss more likely. PSUD families also frequently have to move. Low income, negatively impacted family relationships, divorce or separation, job loss, and frequent relocation all contribute to cumulative stress. And as we discussed earlier, cumulative stress contributes to teen substance use. An adult domain that includes PSUD is also associated with poor family relations, conflict, and less family cohesion. This can result in rebellious deviant behavior such as substance use. Virginia Peisch, in the meta-analysis Parental Opioid Abuse, a review of child outcomes, parenting, and parenting interventions, examines how parental opioid abuse affects adolescent substance use. Peisch says that adolescents with an opioid-abusing parent are at higher risk of psychopathology, which is derived from the Greek word psyche, meaning soul, and pathos, meaning suffering. So psychopathology means psychological and behavioral dysfunction or mental distress. Psychopathological behaviors in the context of substance use include internalizing, externalizing, and substance use. The study also found that opioids affect parenting style. In Peisch's study, they found that opioid-abusing parents are less positive, meaning less sensitive, warm, and involved, and more negative, meaning more harsh and disapproving, than community samples. This leads to poor parent-child relationships that increase the risk of substance use. Abuse and/or neglect is prevalent in households with substance-abusing parents, which contributes to family stress. And you guessed it, cumulative stress, especially in teens, heightens the risk for substance use. According to Ryan McDade in the journal article Parental Influences on African American Adolescent Marijuana Use, teens from families with both biological parents present were the least likely to use marijuana. In fact, teens living with both their biological parents were approximately half as likely as those not living with their biological parents to have used marijuana in the past year. Hoffman performed a study on how family structure affects teen substance use titled Family Structure in Adolescent Substance Use: An International Perspective. He found that compared to families with both biological parents present, father, stepmother, single father, and grandparent-only families had the largest increase in teen drug use. All three of these family groups have the biological mother absent. From this finding, we can infer that a biological mother's absence is most consequential. Single parents usually have less time to supervise their teens, and according to the routine activities theory, youth who engage in unsupervised activities and unstructured socializing are at greater risk of substance use. Because single parents have to take care of more responsibilities, they oftentimes spend less time with their children. Single parents also typically have a lower income and negatively impacted ties with their children, which leads to a more stressful family environment. These risk factors mean that adolescents who come from single-parent households are more likely to turn to substances as a coping mechanism. However, coming from a single-parent household can be a protective factor in some situations. For example, ending a high-conflict or abusive marriage can lead to lower stress levels, which lowers the risk of substance use. Teens from step-parent families in the study were more likely to use substances. According to Chaoyang Lee in the scholarly article Parental Substance Use, Mediating Variables and Adolescent Drug Use, marital disruption is a risk factor for substance use. In fact, any major life change contributes to stress. Also, step-parents tend to spend less time supervising their stepchildren's activities. According to the routine activities theory, this leads to an increased risk of substance use. Step-parents often have poor relationships with their stepchildren, which is also a risk factor. Thus, step-parent families tend to facilitate feelings of stress and anxiety. Stefane Legle performed a study on how family socioeconomic status affects marijuana use among teenagers. She found that a lower socioeconomic status meant the lowest levels of light use in the past year. However, teens from manual labor and unemployed families were more likely to use substances heavily and intensively. This may be because teens from families with lower socioeconomic status are less sensitive to information on health hazards because material difficulties give them a short-term perspective. Another possibility is that experiencing relative poverty in an affluent society is likely to fuel socioeconomic stress. Although you might expect that high socioeconomic status is a protective factor against substance use, Legley found that teens from families with a high socioeconomic background had the lowest lifetime abstinence levels. Even though they were much more susceptible to experimental use, they were less prone to engage in frequent, intensive, and hazardous use. This is because teens from more affluent backgrounds have the resources to experiment with often pricey drugs. Now that we've discussed family risk factors, let's jump into family-centered solutions to this problem. Dr. Cynthia L. Rao states, family-based models are not only a viable treatment alternative for the treatment of drug abuse, but are also consistently recognized among the most effective approaches for treating both adults and adolescents with drug problems. Decades of research point to family factors playing a huge role in adolescent substance abuse. So, it makes sense that family programs that address the roots of the issue are the most effective. Suppose you are taught at school that your education is important and you should take it seriously, but at home your siblings tell you that studying is boring and useless and make fun of you, and even your parents tell you that an education isn't worth it. Without family support and approval, you're likely to give up on studying and doing well in school. It's the same with teen drug use. If teens with substance abuse problems attend programs that tell them why they shouldn't be doing drugs or why they shouldn't drink, but then they go back home to parents who do drugs and support it, they're likely to continue or start doing drugs anyway. If an adolescent's all-important family environment and social circles remained pro-drug, how are they expected not to relapse? Because adolescents' primary social circles have such a deep influence on their behavior, it is necessary to change the family context to effectively address adolescent substance use. Effective family therapy programs addressing adolescent substance use do a couple of things. They educate the family to reduce the adolescent's drug use and alter problematic aspects of the family environment. This creates a positive family environment that promotes long-term recovery and minimizes the risk of relapse. According to Dr. Rao, multiple systems models are very effective in achieving these goals. A couple of examples of this type of model are cognitive behavioral group therapy, multi-systemic therapy, and multidimensional family therapy, or MDFT. Studies point to MDFT being the most effective family program model. MDFT blends family therapy, individual therapy, drug counseling, and multiple systems-oriented intervention approaches. The intervention principles of MDFT emphasize that therapists focus on individual problems, strengths, and goals of the adolescent in addition to focusing on the parents' issues, the family environment, and extra-familial influences such as school and friends. These 4 treatment domains that MDFT focus on are empirically established areas of risk and protection for youth and families. Multiple rigorous research studies have noted the consistent effects of MDFT in reducing adolescent substance use. These studies have even shown more significant effects of MDFT on youth drug use, family relationships, and street delinquency in comparison with other empirically supported programs, such as cognitive behavioral group treatment. MDFT showed more rapid and sustained decreases in psychological involvement with drugs even at the 1-year follow-up. There are also other family factors that reduce the risk of adolescent drug use. According to Dr. Stephen J. Barr, One of these measures is parent monitoring, namely the extent to which parents watch, supervise, and are aware of their children's activities. The theory that explains why monitoring can reduce drug use is called social control theory. Before we had social learning theory, now we have the social control theory. This theory essentially states that teenagers have a tendency towards being rebellious and would do whatever they want if it weren't for someone holding them back. What this means is that adolescents who respect their parents, and if their parents are anti-drug, the adolescent will act in a non-rebellious way. However, it is important to note that if a teen is not close to their parents, they may not feel like listening to their parents. So even if the parents are adamantly anti-drug and monitor their child closely, their child won't feel the need to listen to them, and will probably find a way around restrictions. But in general, parent monitoring that holds naturally rebellious teens back makes it less likely that they will experiment with drugs or other substances. Another protective factor against adolescent drug use is having parents who have at least some college experience. Typically, higher levels of education mean that people are able to attain more lucrative and steady employment and provide a stable environment for their children. Living in a stable and less stressful environment is a protective factor against teen drug use. Following the example of their parents, these teens are more likely to have a higher educational commitment. And according to the CDC, educational commitment is another protective factor against adolescent substance use. Recap and conclusion. Family environment risk factors are important components of the problem of teen substance use. According to the social learning theory, if an adolescent respects their parents, they are likely to hold the same beliefs and choose friends with similar opinions. Because of the similarity between parent and peer influences have been largely overstated in past research models with methodological limitations. Family stress increases the chance a teen will turn to drugs. Teens are particularly sensitive to stress, and on top of that, we just aren't equipped with the best stress coping abilities. Having a parent with a substance use disorder means a higher risk of psychopathology, more negative parenting, and various factors that contribute to a stressful family environment. Family structures that don't include both biological parents typically have less supervising, financial difficulty, poor parent-child relationships, and more stress. A low socioeconomic status means more heavy drug use, while a high socioeconomic status allows for more experimental use. Recent research has dubbed family therapy programs as one of the most effective methods for addressing substance use issues. Multiple systems models such as MDFT are particularly effective types of programs. This type of model focuses on creating a positive family environment that prevents relapse. Considerable advances in research highlight family-based models as a valuable and very effective option in treating adolescent substance use. Other than therapy, parent monitoring and stable living environments reduces the risk of adolescent substance use. As research progresses and we continue to learn more and more about adolescent substance abuse, the full scope of the issue becomes apparent. However, these advances also mean that we are able to identify the roots of the problem, which start from adolescents' primary discourses. Understanding the problem has allowed us to begin identifying and implementing effective solutions and strategies that can help teens and their families recover from this issue.